Hello,
That'll work.
everybody. Hello from the West Coast, and welcome to our guest today, her name is Elizabeth Hoffman, and she lives in Kentucky currently. So we're going to learn about her. But first of all, I want to say, who here loves animal stories? Like where animals take on human personifications. Like, have you ever read those kind of books when you were growing up? Like, they were awesome, right? I mean, they're just so engaging and hard to put down. Like, think about Winnie the Pooh and Charlotte's Web, Stuart Little and the Jungle Book, The Wind and the Willows, the Red Wall. I could read those again and still love them. I just love them. And so I just want to say also, who is interested in meeting a real human squirrel? I invited Elizabeth today, and I see that she's a bit frozen, but now she's kind of back on. But everybody calls her Squirrel. And so I've invited her today to tell us a little bit about herself, how she began her journey into writing, and about some of her books, and especially her latest book, which is called Here I'm Happy. So I'm just going to ask her to show us the cover of her book. Let me just, yeah. So this is the cover of her book. Go ahead and show us. Now, isn't that awesome? I look at that book and like, I am intrigued. There's so much detail in it. And like, there's a family of squirrels there. So that is also intriguing. What was I going to say? Yes. I don't know where my notes are. Okay. So anyway, yes, I just lost my words. Okay. So the cover is exciting because it gives the element of wonder and also depth, like depth. Why depth? Because look at all the detail in the design and the illustration of the cover, right? That's what gives it like the mystery, like the wonder about this book. And can you show the back of it again? It's also very interesting. It's just awesome. So you know, inside there's a brilliant story. Now, it shows a picture of a squirrel family. Well, what can we learn from a squirrel family? So anyway, here is Elizabeth. She is a vivacious, gifted young author and colorful illustrator.
Thank you, Rosemary.
Yes, okay. You can start.
All right. Well, first off, I want to...
Oh, sorry.
Oh,
thank
yes,
you so much for coming. Thank you so much.
I was going to say the same thing. Thanks for inviting me to this live stream chat. This is awesome.
Yeah, we don't know where it's going, but
I think the spontaneity, that's the beauty of this, right? Okay, so yeah, I'm Elizabeth. My author name, Elizabeth Rose Hoffman. I was named after my grandparents, Carol Elizabeth and Rosetta. So I was like, hey, I really want to like reflect my grandmas in this, because they're like the reason I'm here. Like my grandma Rose is always like, baby, you can be anything you want to be. And then my grandma Baum, she's like, she's my editor. She's the truth teller. She tells me all the things like, all right, Elizabeth, this is spelled wrong. Elizabeth, this doesn't quite flow. And I'm like, okay. Oh, so I've always been very humbled by the things she says, and she's almost always right. And I'm like, okay, Grandma, I know you're usually right, so I'm going to humble myself. So yeah, this book wouldn't be what it is without my grandparents and my family and my friends and their thoughtful suggestions and critiques. And they just notice things that I don't notice. And I have been very humbled by, like, one of my friends, she was like, hey, Elizabeth, don't squirrels have more rounded tails at the end? Like these tails look kind of pointed like a fox tail. I was like, oh yeah, you're right. I gotta reconstruct all these squirrel tails now. So yeah,
So how long have you been writing?
Okay, so actually, interesting story about writing. I've always been an artist. Like I've always loved, as far as I can remember, I've always loved drawing. And actually, interesting thing, I was like, oh yeah, I've been an author illustrator for like 10 years. But then like I was hanging out with Jesus. I hang out with Jesus a lot. I just talk to him like he's a person, a God or Jesus, whichever you want to call him. But so I was hanging out with Jesus one day and he just took me back to a memory that I remembered a long time ago when I was like 8. And I was drawing like these little stories. Like I took like printing paper and I just folded it and just stapled the edges and I just like opened them up and I just started like drawing a story. I just opened it. I was doing like, didn't have any words. I was just drawing these little horses and I did like a wild horse herd and it was just like the story. And then they started like the generation after the next horse. And I was like, oh, I was like writing. Well, I wasn't really writing. I was drawing kids books when I was 8. What the heck? You know, that's 20 years ago. So that was really neat. So I guess sort of 20 years I've been writing and illustrating, but back to the writing part, I've never been a very good writer, actually. At least I've never felt like I've been. I've always had stories that I wanted to like tell, but I could never like, my tenses were always wrong. I had grammar errors. I couldn't spell very well. So I was like, this is horrible. I'll just stick with art. I'm good at art. So I was always drawing art. And I guess it wasn't until like college. So I was actually homeschooled all the way up until my junior year. And then I went to public school, which was a very interesting transition. I learned a lot about myself though. And then, so in college, I was living with my grandma Baum, the editor, and she's the reason why I got all A's on my papers. I don't know how I would have done it without her. So I would write my paper all out and then I'd hand it to her and she'd be like, all right, baby, sit down here. And she'd just go through it, highlight stuff, be like, all right, this is the wrong tense. All right, this is very vague. You need to add more to this spot. And so she was the reason why I actually became a better writer. I feel like I didn't have a writing class in college, but I became a better writer. And I think it was probably like a few years ago. Excuse me. I just had some tea. A few years ago when I was on my Instagram page and I had wrote on there, like, you know, your little bio area. I had wrote on there, I'd be author, illustrator or something like that. And it just hit me one time. I'm like, wait a minute, I've already published a few books. I am an author illustrator. What the heck? I need to change that. And so I like changed it. Elizabeth Rose Hoffman, author illustrator. And I was like, yes, wow. And like just doing that change, like completely like changed my mindset. I'm like, I am an author illustrator and I have some experience, you know, like what the heck? So I guess that's like kind of like that imposter syndrome where you're like, oh, I'm not really, I just want to be. But then I'm like, wait, I actually am. What? So that, did I answer that question? I feel like I added a bunch to that
that's
one.
fine. That's great. That's great. So how many books have you like written and illustrated?
Okay, so this book right here is actually my 10th book that I'm independently publishing. And out of the 10 books, I've wrote and illustrated, I think it was 7 of them. So 7 that I fully have wrote and illustrated, and then I have 3 that I was hired to illustrate.
Awesome. Congratulations on all of that.
Thank you.
So, yeah, is there anything else you want to say about your book, your latest book?
Yeah. I can go ahead and kind of tell the story of how this book happened.
Yeah, that would be awesome. That would be great.
Yeah. So starting off, this book is actually a heart book. It's extreme, like it's actually created for my heart first, for me first. It sounds almost selfish, but it was just like the way the journey of creating this book, that's how it started. And so I actually lost my mom when I was 15. I lost her to breast cancer. And I was a mama's girl. My mom was my best friend and I loved her. So grief is no joke. So this book is about that. How to just like relating to someone that's lost somebody like validating the painter. And then at the end, I show like how I actually like, this is how I've discovered how to continue life, even though after a tragedy. I got a little emotional there. Yeah. So back in 2019, before this book was even a thought, I hope I wasn't glitching there anywhere. Have I glitched or froze? Okay, good. So back in 2019, I was really active on this illustrators forum. It's called Society of Visual Storytellers. And every month they had this monthly prompt where you can like draw something and everyone just posts on this one thread. And then there's like, usually they'll have like little winners, like, oh, everyone gets to vote who's the winner and all that stuff. And so it was really fun. And so I was like, hey, this is great. I want to start like just having an excuse to like draw something every month. And so I was like participating a lot. And so in, I think it was April, they had this monthly prompt called the moment before ... something happens, you know? And so people were drawing things like people were running and about to trip. And then there was like people like walking around or animals or whatever they're drawing. And there's like water bottle splashed on their head and just like all these things. It was really fun prompt. And up to that point, I'd been doing a lot of stuff that was just really lighthearted and fun. And I was like, oh, I want to do something like more serious. So for some reason, I decided to do the drawing on the moment before my mom passed away. I mean, it's super deep. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do that. And so I started a work in progress thread for that. And so I had people like talking, like helping me like get the composition right and doing all that stuff. And I had a lot of people like really, they were really excited about this. And I was like, yeah, this is great. People love it. So I'll show you the piece that I ended up finishing and submitting.
Oh, that is wonderful. I love that.
Yeah. So this was the very first drawing.
Yeah, that's so heartwarming.
Thank you. So I drew that. I submitted it to the forum. People liked it. And I didn't really think much about it. I printed it out, put it in my portfolio, but like I didn't really think too much about it after that. And then a few weeks later, I was showing my portfolio to a colleague of mine. I was showing her progress on another book I was working on called Chickens on the Trampoline, which oddly enough, that book's not even done yet. This one kind of took over. Anyway, so I was showing her the progress on that one. She was like, oh yeah, this is great. And then she saw this piece, this drawing, and she was like, oh, what's that? She's like, I want to know more about that. That looks interesting. And I was like, oh, well, it's just a drawing I did. There's not really, wasn't planning on doing a book on that or anything. And so I just kind of like dropped a little thought in my head and it was just kind of like sitting there. And then about a week later, I was sitting out on the loading dock at my work, eating my lunch. I worked at a t-shirt printing shop. I was the graphic designer there. And I was sitting there, minding my own business. And you know how like God just sometimes just comes up to you and he just like drops in a whole idea in your head and you're like, oh, cool, that's a great idea. Thank you, Jesus. And you go and do it. So I was just sitting there eating my little sandwich and then Jesus was like, Bilk! And I was like, ran away into the art, like on some paper and I was just like scrambling around because I was like, I have this whole idea in my head. I need to like write it out. I need to put the storyboard everywhere. And so I was like fumbling around and then like horses are very close. It's a story really close to my heart. So I was getting emotional. I was like, and I was like crying and drawing this at the same time. And I work with another artist, a coworker, and he likes to eat in the art room. So he was sitting there behind his big monitor eating his salami sandwich. And he like peeked back there and he was like, Squirrel, you okay? And I was like, I'm fine. I'll tell you later. So I was like drawing the whole thing out. And then, so I had like the whole storyboard and like a lot of the words out. Of course, over 3 years, the story is not really it's changed a lot compared to that very first draft, but pretty much a lot of the beginning of the story and the middle was there. And I was just like, oh my gosh, Jesus, this is going to be a book. This is going to be a book. Oh my gosh. So that's kind of the story of how this book got started. And then let's see. So it's April 2019. So it's been over 3 years. Huh. So this book has had 3 major storyline changes throughout the whole journey of creating this book. So when I had the first storyboard, I kind of had the whole beginning really never changed throughout this whole period of creating this book. but the ending, I didn't know the ending. I didn't actually know the ending until like 6 months ago. Wow. Maybe a little more, like 8 months ago. Anyway, but I didn't know the ending. I was like, how is this book supposed to end? I don't know.
Right.
And so that was super challenging. Like there was times I had like, I think three whole different endings. And every time I changed the ending, like I just have people doing feedback. I'm like, the ending's just not right. I gotta change it. And then like the last ending change we did, my grandma suggested it. And I was like, no, grandma, it's done. It's good. No, grandma, it's done. She's like, no, I think it's not quite right. I was like, no. So, oh my goodness, it was so humbling and also really hard because, like, you know, as a creative, you spend a lot of time on something and it's your
Right.
baby.
Mm-hmm.
And when I changed the ending those 3 times, each time I changed the ending, I had to say bye-bye to a bunch of art I spent hours and hours and hours on. I was like, oh, I love this piece. Can I somehow still use it? It's just not going to work anymore with the new storyline.
Yeah.
Oh, that was so hard. Yeah. So I feel like for 3 years, I've been like birthing this book.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of funny. I feel like I have empty book nest, like empty nester. I'm a book empty nester.
Yeah. Yeah, because you pour so much of yourself into this book
Yeah.
for 3 years. That's quite the journey. So,
Ah,
but I can
yeah.
tell it's a really good book. And one thing I like about um, books, you know, even like children's books, even with animals, you know, like you can read about an experience, like kind of like vicariously, like what other like tragedies and things that other people have gone through, and you can actually come out with courage then
Yeah.
face your own struggles, your own tragedies, that you know. And that's a great thing I like about real books, you know,
Yes.
even if they're like through the lives of animals, you know. You're like, you know, we're following along with the story, with the, in this case it's the family of squirrels and how that all plays out, but in through their tragedies and working through them and coming out on the other end, it it like gives children hope that even in tragedies, you know, you
Yeah.
work through things and you find hope. So I like those kind of books. I love those kind of books. So I hope you do really well with your book, and I hope a lot of people see it. So yeah, what other kind of questions do I have here? Like how, so like what is, like here's a question that a new writer might ask. What is writer's block, and what do you do when you have writer's block?
Yes, writer's block is not fun. I feel like for me, I get writer's block or even artist block when I'm kind of stressed out about something and I'm like really trying to force it and it's just not coming. I'm like, oh, okay, this is not working. Well, especially with this book, I had like heart block, I guess.
Great.
I don't know if that's a thing.
It
Uh,
is.
I got to a point a dozen times with this book, and I'm like, okay, I don't feel like I can go further right now.
Yeah.
I had to stop for like a whole month or a whole 2 months. I just set it down. Like I was drawing it on my iPad and I just set it down. I just won't open the app. I'm working Procreate and I just wouldn't touch it. And I'm like, I'm tired. I just get tired of looking at it. I'm like, is this really that great? I don't know. I'm tired of looking at it. And so
Yeah.
just like set it down. But so like heart block and then art block, artist block and heart block.
Right.
Art block. A lot of times I just gotta like just step away and just go outside, take a walk, or like go on a fun trip somewhere over the weekend and just like completely like refresh my brain. And a lot of times, especially with art, and I think it goes with writing too, is that when you come back with fresh eyes, you can be like, whoa, that's not right. And you can like switch it up and be like, oh, hey, I can see where I need to go now. And just like taking a step back and just resting, like kind of like with how God set up the days of the week. Like he's like, working for 6 weeks or for 6 days, and then you have that day off and you're like taking a whole break and you're relaxing and you're resting, and you come back, you're like, I'm ready to come back. My brain is refreshed.
Right. Yes.
So I don't know. That's kind of how it's been for me anyway.
Yeah, it's like that a lot, especially when you're trying to create something. Sometimes you just stepping away, and taking a break from it, like not thinking about it constantly. It comes back, come back to it refreshed and with new ideas. So yeah. What kind of advice would you give a new writer working on her first book or his first book? Like let's say a student who wants to write stories, and so they're interested in stories. It's not like they have to, they don't want to, but they want to write a story. Yeah. And they're working on their first book. Like, is there like a way to start, or do you just start writing, or do you think about a plot? Do you think about your characters first, or the setting? Like, do you like kind of plan those things out ahead of time? Like, how do you do that?
Okay, so with my stories, with my illustrating and writing, usually it's the story that comes first. So like, let's see. So I have several stories that are like this one right here. It's like, it's not really a story. It's like a coffee table book. It's a goat with many coats, and it's essentially just a goat trying on a bunch of different coats.
Great.
And so like for these, I have my notes app up, and I'll just be like, oh, this would be funny if I did a coat like that. And I just like put up my notes, and then I just start drawing them. So those ones don't really have a storyline, but for things with storylines, typically I'll have that story in my head, and then I'll just start like writing it out, and then just kind of read over it a lot and change a few things. And then I'll just take a break, come back to it. Like, there's something about that pickling process. You let something just sit and you just come back to it, and you're like, oh, that's not right. I want to switch that. I'm going to reword this.
Right.
So usually it just starts out with, I just think of a funny story or something that would be really fun or entertaining that I could like kind of visualize it in my head already. I'm like, okay, well, what's the words for it? And so I'll just start writing the words down. And then when the words start coming, I'll start shifting to a storyboard method, to where I actually get a big board and put a bunch of grids in it. And then, so I have an open spread. So open spread is where it's like this with the gutter in the middle.
Right.
And so I'll figure out with the storyboard how to arrange the words in the text with the illustrations that go around it, and how the illustrations are going to fit around the text, how much text there is that's going to be on that spread, and then organizing the words of the story in the most page turning like anticipation. So like there'll be like something like something's about to happen, and then it's like dot dot dot, what's gonna happen? You're like, oh, I gotta turn the page and find out. Oh, something that's like arranging the stories on the page, on each spread, to where you're like, what's gonna happen on the other side? You gotta turn the page and find out. So that's actually one of my favorite parts. It's definitely probably use the most mental power to do that, because it's a lot of thinking, trying to figure out how it's all arranged.
Yeah, I never thought of that before.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's almost like creating a movie in a way, because like when you watch movies, like I can't help but like sometimes critique them. I'm like, oh, I would not have done that angle. But there's like a really good story that's really well made, that's a movie. I'm like, oh my god, I feel like I really like movies because of that, because I like to tell stories too, and movies are storytelling. So I can actually get ideas from movies how to do books, which is kind of interesting.
I was just checking the Facebook group, and it looks like it is streaming into our Facebook group. So I just didn't know if it's going to show on the screen or not. Anyway, yeah. So I don't know what any more questions to ask, but I do hope that our young readers and young writers create their own animal, try to write an animal story. I think that would be super. Our son did one with with mice. And it was so good, but he didn't know how to do, like he did, like, I guess you'd call it like a chapter. And he was like in grade 4, but he didn't know how to like carry on, and do a next chapter. But we were like trying to encourage him because like we all read it. It was really good. So like everybody loves animal stories. Kids should write animal stories from and give them like human personification. They're excellent. Everybody will love them. So yeah, so this is Squirrel. Thank you so much for coming on today and talking a little bit about yourself and about your journey and your journey of your book. And just like, even like authors, they don't just like write it out and then hand it in. They have lots of like changes and of course that takes patience. It takes perseverance as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but if you stick with it, you come out with something that people will want to read. So we just want to say, that's the word I want to say. I struggle sometimes with expressing myself. Just like continue on in your journey. We hope you do well. And we want to see what other books are coming from you as well, what other books you will write in the future. Now, where are your books available? Are they on Amazon or where are they?
Okay, so all my books are on Amazon for sure. This one I'm doing a little different. So it's also on Amazon, but it's also online. It's pretty much on all online bookstores anywhere.
Oh, okay.
So like it's on Barnes and Noble's like website, and which is that's pretty crazy. I'm like, oh, it's on Barnes and Noble's. Of course, I don't know if it'd be in store ever, but hey, it's pretty cool.
Okay, so we can find it on Amazon anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. Probably the US Amazon, maybe not the Canada one. I don't know.
I don't know either. Well, it's supposed to be in Australia and Europe, like the Amazons. As far as I know, all over the world. It might just be different pricing.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
So I don't know. It might be in Canada. I probably should look that up.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for joining us today with your presence. And maybe we will see you again someday.
All right. Thanks for having me, Rosemary.
You're welcome, Squirrel. I want to call you Squirrely. I don't know why. Okay, so let me stop the live stream. Okay, bye everybody.